Hello all, Old Geek here, and in this video I will be reviewing not one, but 4 adventures. Many of us have played solo adventures at some time in our gaming past. I still do. I have a stream on most Friday nights in which I read through a variety of them, with chat making the decisions, and they are good fun. For me, they were part of my introduction to the RPG hobby, sometime around 1983 to 84. I read a lot of Endless Quest books, most of the early Fighting Fantasy series, and who remembers that short introductory adventure in the basic D&D box set? The Evil Bargle and the death of the beautiful and kind-hearted Alina. To this day, that 1983 version of D&D remains one of the best introductions to gaming, and that is largely down to how well that short scenario presented the mechanics and the highs and lows of adventuring. So fast forward 40 years, and there are now many choose-your-own-adventure books out there, plenty to choose from. And in this video I'll be taking a look at the 4 official such adventures produced by Chaosium for the Call of Cthulhu game. Here behind me you see my copies of these 4 adventures. Now Chaosium initially published 2 of them back in 1985. These were entitled Alone Against the Dark and Alone Against the Wendigo. It would be 30 years before they published more. Alone Against the Dark was revised and reissued in 2015, along with a new scenario entitled Alone Against the Flames. Alone Against the Wendigo was renamed Alone Against the Frost and re-released in 2019, and the quartet was completed with Alone Against the Tide in 2020. Though this last one had been available as a web-only release a few years earlier. Since 2018, Alone Against the Flames has been further revised and included as part of the Call of Cthulhu starter box set. With my reviews, I tend to start with presentation, so I'll do the same here. Artwork is rather sparse across the entire series, but what is there is pretty good, and it doesn't really impair the look of the books, as all 4 look and feel like very professionally put together products, at least initially. 3 of my books are fine, but the 4th, Alone Against the Dark, which is actually my newest one, fell to pieces after being played just once. Looking online, I see this is a very common issue with the earlier printings of this book, but I bought mine in 2021, 6 years after it was first published. Surely if they knew about the problems, then copies should have been recalled and the issue rectified. Roughly a third, the first third of my book, has completely come away from the binding, and I've only played the adventure once. Okay, now to give each of them a brief overview in turn. Alone Against the Dark is a beefy adventure. There are 594 keyed entries in a book of just over 100 pages. Through the course of the adventure, many of the entries are revisited often, so it feels even longer. The adventure also supplies 4 pre-generated characters, and it is assumed that these are played in turn, in a specific order. And it does give you ideas for bringing in your own characters should all 4 of those die, but it also says you can just go back to the beginning and rotate through them again. The plot revolved around the arrest of an associate, and it takes you across the globe from the USA to Greece to Egypt and on to Antarctica. There are specific travel mechanics, there's a calendar to keep track of time, and there's even a little pyramid puzzle to be used when exploring Egypt. Alone Against the Frost is even larger. It weighs in at 654 keyed entries and over 110 pages. In this one, you play a group of 5 characters as they undertake a trip into the forests of Canada together. Again, a number of the keyed paragraphs are revisited a number of times. But unlike Alone Against the Dark, Alone Against the Frost is very light on additional mechanics. It runs almost entirely on the familiar Call of Cthulhu rules with no added bookkeeping complexity beyond having a copy of each of the 5 5 character sheets. My copy of Alone Against the Flames is the 2018 edition that came with the Call of Cthulhu starter set. It is much smaller than the 2 previous books that I've detailed thus far, with 270 keyed paragraphs spread over 55 pages. After a short overview of how the game of Call of Cthulhu works, the adventure throws you straight into a dramatic scenario involving your character's attempts to escape from a strange backwater town. Along the way, it teaches the player how to make a player character, and there are no pre-gens supplied with this book. Alone Against the Tide is an 88-page book, but it has the fewest number of keyed entries at 243. It adds a couple of pre-generated characters, but it also keeps the step-by-step character creation instructions seen in Alone Against the Flames. It is set in an affluent lakeside town in Massachusetts, and the lone investigator has to escape the clutches of a mysterious fog that is rolling in off the lake. So how do the 4 books compare with each other, and which do I recommend, if any, and why? The traditional fighting fantasy series, which, being my own most played, form in my mind the baseline for the length of a choose-your-own adventure. These mostly had 400 entries with ultra-simple play mechanics. Call of Cthulhu, by its very nature, is a little more complex, and all 4 books require access to or knowledge of the basic game mechanics. With that knowledge in place, all bar Alone Against the Dark are very simple to play, and Alone Against the Flames' place as part of the starter set is absolutely perfect. The added time and travel mechanics in Alone Against the Dark provided an interesting addition, at least initially, as they began to grate on me after a while, as the processes became extremely monotonous and somewhat repetitive, especially the Atlantic crossing, as you have to play it through multiple times with the various characters, and it's not particularly engaging. The town exploration mechanics again are great to begin with. They're an ambitious addition when combined with the time charts, and for that I applaud the attempt. But they are a bit more than I personally want when I sit down to relax with this type of game book. They do, however, enable Alone Against the Dark to feel like a long and involving adventure. And in terms of scenario length, both Dark and Frost are way ahead of Flames, with Tide being the shortest. In fact, that is my biggest criticism of Alone Against the Tide. It is so short that I don't think it justifies the price tag. Alone Against the Flames is also rather short, but it doesn't feel as short as Tide because the adventure builds more fluidly. Plus it's part of the starter set. So then what about story and atmosphere? My clear favourite here is Alone Against the Flames, as it is the one that best incorporates a feeling of growing dread with an explosive finale. It will feel a little obvious though to most of us, as the plot is lifted largely from a famous cult film, but for the purpose of a Call of Cthulhu adventure it works really well. Alone Against the Tide has the most evocative text to me. Yes, it has fewer entries, but they tend to be longer and they are well written. It's just that it felt like it was over before it really got going. Alone Against the Dark is the most intricate and complex tale of the 4. It's a classic continent-hopping yarn and has some great moments, but where it suffers is in the constant application of the bookkeeping, which breaks up the atmosphere, and there are some awkward moments in terms of continuity due to the attempts to make the whole scenario feel more open and give the player more freedom to explore. Alone Against the Frost sits nicely in the middle here, providing a good balance of atmosphere and flexibility of storyline. It does have a couple of its own jarring continuity moments, but I can forgive these given the sheer size of the adventure. So, on to replayability. Most choose-your-own adventure books will have only one truly successful outcome, That's usually entry number 400 in the book, especially in the Fighting Fantasy series. That is the "you win" paragraph. All 4 of these scenarios have multiple endings, both positive and negative. Of course, there are lots of sorry or dead endings, as there should be, but there are also a number of winning endings, different levels and styles of win, and that does help with the adventure's replayability. Again, Tide and Flames are the 2 simplest in terms of ending mechanics. Both have escape the situation endings and also defeat the foes endings. In Alone Against the Dark, you restart every time a character dies, and you are judged depending on how many characters that your choices killed along the way. Alone Against the Frost is different. Your success is determined by what your character learned, and this is probably the better system of the 2 bigger adventures. Personally, I was more than happy to play through the 2 shorter books multiple times to find the various completion methods. Alone Against the Dark pretty much forces you to go through much of it several times, and I have no urge, at least right now, to return to the book, having read so much of it over and over again. Having said that, that one big playthrough with the full 4 characters absorbed more of my time than any of the other books. Alone Against the Frost is the odd one here for me. I've played it twice and done badly both times, and I want to return to it, but I want to forget sections of it first, because there was some repetition in there. So while I've yet to succeed to any real degree in the scenario, it's probably the one I will return to the most over the next few years. So now on to my conclusions regarding all 4. I have enjoyed playing all of these adventures. They all have merit. They all do certain things well. But in 4th place, I have Alone Against the Tide. It's well written, the text is engaging, and it's evocative. The adventure flows very nicely, but it is far too short to justify its individual price tag, and that is a real shame, as the scenario deserves a little more meat on its bones and a few more twists and turns. If it was to be re-released in the future, packaged with Alone Against the Flames in a single volume and aimed at beginners to Call of Cthulhu, then that would be a very, very sensible option. In 3rd place, Alone Against the Dark. The most ambitious product here by a mile, with added mechanics that work. They serve their purpose, but they do become a pain in the backside as they end up being too repetitive. The plot weaves itself in proper Call of Cthulhu fashion, but any atmosphere that was built up for me was all too often lost because of the overuse of new mechanics and the multitude of repeating text locations and excess page flipping that the travel system induces. Still, it is the one I've spent the most time with so far, but it's also the one I'm least likely to go back to. Plus, it fell apart. In 2nd place, Alone Against the Frost. The 5-at-once party system in this adventure, I feel, is superior to the sequential character system employed by Alone Against the Dark. This is a beefy, exploration-based scenario that retains a solid sense of atmosphere and rewards a curious player, though not too much. If you get too curious, it'll punish you. Yes, there is some repetition in the travel entries, but there's nowhere near as much as was used in the previous book. I have played this one the least of the 4, but it will be the one I return to first, and probably the highest number of times. So in 1st place, of course, it is Alone Against the Flames. Yes, the storyline is all too familiar. Yes, it's relatively short, but it's tense, it's engaging, and most of all, it's fun. It's there in the starter set to do the job that the venerable tale in the Mensa basic D&D book did way back in 1983, to introduce a new player to the joys of Call of Cthulhu, to the style of game they should expect, to the base mechanics, and to the general feel of the game world. And in all 3 of those aspects, it succeeds perfectly. Well, that's it for this video. Any comments? Feel free to post them below. I've been the Old Geek. Till next time, see ya!